Boom. All right. Hello, Grady Hendrix. Tell me about the ninth Old School Kung Fu Fest and how people outside of New York City can participate.
Yeah, so Subway Cinema's doing an old school kung fu fest for years. I think our first one was 2001,
Mm.
and there was a pandemic, so we didn't do any screenings for a while. And when we came back, we realized we had a chance to do this Joseph Quo retrospective, which we've been wanting to do since like 2018. It's just been a matter of sort of getting the restorations done and getting masters and new subtitles. And one of the few nice things about the pandemic is everyone realized that we can do this thing virtually also. And so we're having 5 live screenings, but we're also putting up, I believe it's 5 other of Joseph Quo's movies, or 4 other of Joseph Quo's movies that we're making available online so that people can watch them anywhere. And it's just, you can just go to the regular page and find the links. You can either find it through subwaycinema.com or do the Museum of the Moving Images website. But yeah, and actually it's interesting because Joseph Quo really did a lot. I mean, he was sort of like a guy who was always looking at what the latest trend of the day was and seeing what he could do with it. So some of his more atypical movies are the ones we have up for the virtual screening. We've got I think it's a Shaolin Kung Fu, which has nothing to do with Shaolin Kung Fu. It was his attempt to make a Bruce Lee movie about rickshaw drivers, which is actually really fun,
Mm.
and has a bizarre ending finishing move, and a small child forgetting that he can't walk on water and almost drowning. And everyone's really mean to the hard-boiled egg boy. But also Shaolin Kids, which has nothing to do with kids. It's another sort of Shaolin martial epic. But the weird one we've got up on virtual screening is The Old Master, which is a really, really weird movie. Master Yu Jim Yun was Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung's teacher, and he ran the Chinese Opera Academy or Chinese Drama Academy. And when they were kids, they went there, all these famous martial artists, and he really basically taught them by sort of abusing them terribly. And so they learned these incredible acrobatic skills, but they also complained about not having enough to eat and being cold all the time and getting hit a lot. And so when Jackie and Sammo and those guys were getting huge, Joseph Quo had this idea to put Yu Jim Yun in a movie. So the Old Master has this like 70, I think he's 74 or 76 in it. And he sits him in LA. So, and then everything's about disco for some weird reason. And it is a weird, weird movie. I mean, there's chainsaw foo. There is one of the most sadistic disco dancing scenes I've ever seen. Yu Jim Yun, because he's so old, every time a fight breaks out, he turns his back to the camera so he can be doubled. And he's doubled, people say, by Yun Biao, who is Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung's little brother in the opera school. So the action's good, but weird. Bill Louis, who is a big karate champ in the States, is in it, who's amazingly athletic and acrobatic. But it is a deeply weird movie. And it's one we could never show in a theater because the audience would murder us. But at home, with the right substances, I think it's really worth seeing.
That's hilarious. I love the mystery of chess boxing because first, I'm a big Wu-Tang guy. And to me, like peak culture, I think it still is when you find a Wu-Tang sample or piece of trivia in one of these movies. That's like that's just, it doesn't get, life doesn't get better than that. And this one has two. The bad guy is Ghostface Killer,
right?
And then the name they did, Wu-Tang did Dumb Mystery of Chess Boxing. But I'd love to get your thoughts on it too, because that's enough for me.
Well, it's interesting because martial arts movies really kicked off in the States in '73, which was when Five Fingers of Death came out over here, which was the first dubbed kung fu movie to play in America on mainstream screens outside of Chinatown. And that was followed up by Angela Mao's first movie, and then Duel of the Iron Fist, which was a Shaw Brothers movie that came over dubbed. And then Bruce Lee's movies started coming out, culminating in August of '73 when Enter the Dragon hit screens. And that was like a little less than a month after Bruce Lee died. So that was when Kung Fu got huge in America. And it was also the same year that in August of '73, DJ Kool Herc spun for the first time. And everyone considers that was the beginning of hip hop. So hip hop and Kung Fu in America have always been kind of intertwined and overlapping. I mean, you have people like Crazy Legs Cologne, the b-boy, who talked about, you know, taking moves from martial arts movies and incorporating them on the dance floor. And and also a lot of distributors realized that the audiences who were really loyal to kung fu movies after sort of, you know, a more mainstream audience started like giving up on them was a Black audience and a Latinx audience. And so that really, the links between sort of African American culture and Black culture and street culture in America and kung fu movies is really strong. And, you know, in martial arts in the Black community goes all the way back to the 30s with the Fruit of Islam, you know, the Nation of Islam security arm who wouldn't use weapons. They trained in judo and jujitsu and then later karate. So there's always been this really strong link. And I do think, yeah, with Wu-Tang, that really comes to the fore. And it's really, I think it's really cool seeing like Mystery of Chess Boxing, and Seven Grandmasters has a little bit of a Wu-Tang connection as well. And one of the things I think is really interesting is these movies are so 70s and hip hop is so 80s, and Wu-Tang is considered very, you know, late 80s, even early 90s, more like 90s culture. So it's amazing to see that sort of like connection between those decades, you know, in the music all that time later. You know, which I think is really interesting. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's impossible to watch something like Mystery of Chess Boxing and see those moves and not think of like break dancers. You know, it's completely impossible.
Right. And I love how long the fights go on for, when we all know that will last 20 seconds.
Yeah, well, and that's a real Quo trademark, right? Is these endless fights, and they're interesting because, you know, occasionally there'll be a dud, but Mystery of Chess Boxing, they sort of like, and I also think 36 Deadly Styles is another one where these long fight sequences just keep escalating and escalating and escalating. And they just keep finding new variations in two guys in a field kicking each other. They just keep stepping it up. Which I think is a really interesting thing. Quo just is able to wring so much value out of such minimal material.
Yeah, Ghostface Killer is a great villain too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like what's the actor's name? Do you remember?
I think it's Mark Long. I'm pretty sure it's Mark Long who's Ghostface Killer.
And of course, Lo Lei is like, you know, his gallery of bad guys is just, it tops, it's right up there with Lee Van Cleef, or you know, I can't think of anyone better than those two, really.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, and you know, one of the interesting things with Quo also is, you know, I love how complicated the movies get. Like everyone has a secret identity. On some level, everyone's going to wind up related to each other. Everyone has like, you know, their real name and their like killer name, like Ghostface Killer or something. So there's this real like, you know, there are movies that were really made for the Times Square audience, that kind of grindhouse audience that wants something to keep it engaged every 5 minutes. You know, it's like there's a plot twist, there's another action scene, there's someone died you weren't expecting, you know, someone has a secret identity. There are movies that are designed to keep your butt in the seat.
Yeah. I don't remember which one, but I was watching one of these movies by Joseph, and one of the guys planted the idea of getting revenge on someone. It was a phony idea, but he had been planning it since this guy was an infant.
Yeah.
It's just,
yeah.
It's hilarious. It's so funny when these left turns come. They're truly insane. But one thing that's really cheesed me sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just, I think that's Seven Grandmasters.
Right.
Is a movie I love so much. But anyways, okay. Sorry, what were you saying?
Sorry. One thing that has really cheesed me as a Blu-ray collector is that not enough of these movies are available in North America on Blu-ray.
Right.
I would love to know why that is the case. Is that going to change?
Yeah, well, so these Quo movies now have all these 2K restorations, which look amazing. And people put in, you know, the work on new subtitles and stuff, which I think is a big step. I think it's hard for American Blu-ray companies to justify the expense on something that, you know, these movies have always been undervalued. Kung Fu movies, almost from the beginning, were considered cheap and disposable. Even while, you know, Bruce Lee, and, you know, there was a week in 1973 in the spring when Five Fingers of Death, Angela Mao's Deep Thrust, which I think was Lady Whirlwind, and Bruce Lee's Fist of Fury, which was actually a retitled version of The Big Boss. But those three movies were the number 1, 2, and 3 movie in America. I mean, they were huge. And it was the really hip thing to do to go see a Kung Fu movie. But so many came out so fast that I would say even by the end of the year, they were considered sort of cheap and disposable. And I think that carries on even today. And I think that kind of snobbery, does affect companies. And I think even some of these companies that are really well intentioned, they don't see the market for these movies. And I think one of the things that's interesting is a lot of these companies don't see the market because some of that market, or a big share of that market, is a black and a non-white market. And they don't see those as their typical Blu-ray customer. They look at Blu-rays and they're like, oh, it's the guy who wants to own, the director's cut of Deep Red, in 4K and all this. And they're not seeing that there's a whole legion of folks, who are outside that demographic, who grew up on these movies, who love them, who feel the same affection for these movies that a Fangoria reading kid from, South Carolina feels for Halloween 3, so I don't think they see the audience, and they don't justify the expense. But with these restorations out there now, I mean, I know Eureka's doing this box set of Joseph Kuo movies. They're ones that I think are getting picked up now. I don't think they've made the announcement, but I know a couple have just been picked up for release in the US. I think it's changing. I think it's taken a while. I think it's, I just don't, I think these existed in a cultural blind spot for a lot of Blu-ray companies.
Yeah, hopefully the Arrow Video Shaw Scope box set can make a big tidal wave change in
exactly.
this unfortunate trend.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, these movies get viewed so differently all over the world. I mean, in Europe, these movies have a lot of cachet. In Asia, they're considered classics. And in the States, they're kind of like disposable, or have been considered that way. I think that's changing. And I think accessibility was a real problem. The Shaw stuff was off the market for 20 or 30 years because Shaw just would not do video releases.
Why not?
They got burned a little in the beginning, and then they were releasing some of their movies here in the 70s, and like Roger Corman's New World Picture picked up this real prestige movie that was like a huge all-star production from Shaw, and then cut half an hour from it and threw in a sex scene. It's like, I think they were kind of like, what are we doing? And then they came back in the 80s and did a lot of TV, a lot of movie releases. But then Shaw just kind of gave up on film. They went into television. They closed down the studios in 86. And I think they just stopped seeing the value in these movies and just decided to take them off the market. They just thought there was no value in them anymore. And it took a long time, into the 2000s, before someone purchased that library, a Malaysian company called Celestial, that started putting them out again and doing restorations. But, they were gone for a very long. You could only see them as bootlegs for many, many years.
So since 2019, I have very passionately been covering the New York Asian Film Festival, which you're a co-founder of. And yes. I would love to hear the origin story, or like a synopsis of the origin story.
So the short version is, a bunch of us used to go to the Music Palace, which wound up being the last Chinatown movie theater in North America. And it was like the $6 double features all the way through. I think it closed down in 99 or so. And when we saw the for sale sign go up, a lot of us realized that movies that were art house films were always going to play. Wong Kar-wai, Zhang Yimou, Chen Kai-jie, that kind of stuff. But the stuff we love, the action movies, horror, comedy, romance, all the genre stuff, no one was going to show it anymore. And so a bunch of us got together, and we had no experience, and we just sort of pooled our money and started showing movies back in 2000s when we started. And about 3 or 4 years in, we started doing the New York Asian Film Festival because we've been doing retrospectives and focusing on Choi Hark or Johnny To or new Korean cinema. but we wanted to do stuff from everywhere. And that really took on a life of its own. And so I think in about 2017 or 18, we kind of split, where a bunch of us went off and kept doing the New York Asian Film Festival. And then the rest of us kept doing Subway Cinema, which is, and we sort of both have a different mission. New York Asian Film Festival is still doing the new stuff from all over Asia. And the rest of us were kind of like, a lot of these movies are available, they're around, it's good to curate them, but we really are interested in finding the stuff that's been forgotten and kind of slip between the cracks and doing these retros of that. So, we just did screenings of the 4K restorations that Criterion has of the Once Upon a Time in China movies, because those just have gone underseen for so long. And now we're doing this Joseph Kuo retrospective, and then we've got a bunch of new events coming up in the new year. There's going to be some really obscure stuff. So we're just kind of like that. The New York Asian Film Festival became its own beast, and the rest of us are just sort of like we're happy here in the margins, digging up the freakazoid stuff.
Well, fair enough. I mean, geez, like hearing all this makes me want to move to New York City.
You should. There's plenty of open apartments right now.
I would love to. Or at least visit. Okay, so thank you very much, Grady. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
So wait, before you go, I just got to ask. Yeah. Were you a Joseph Kuo fan?
Oh, heck yes, man.
Okay, good.
Oh yeah, total win. It's a win. Win. But one more question. I want you to tell my audience about your book, These Fists Break Bricks, How Kung Fu Movies Swept America and Changed the World.
So this guy, Chris Pajali, and I started writing this about 2 years ago, and it's coming out now. Supply chains have made the exact release date a little hard to pin down. Some people have copies, some people it's in shipping, but it's a history of Kung Fu movies coming to America. And we're going to start in 73. And then we realized there was so much before that. So we start all the way back at the turn of the century. And we just dug up so many crazy stories, everything from the CIA backing karate movies to root out communism, to an 11-year-old kid and his dad who made this global blockbuster Kung Fu movie, from old Bruce Lee footage to, just the wildest stuff. And it goes all the way through the 70s and the 80s, and right on up until sort of the death of the boom in the late 80s, early 90s, when a lot of TV stations stopped showing Kung Fu movies because they realized that, because Reagan changed the rules of the FCC, and they realized that, we could actually sell this space for infomercials. And then a lot of cities realized, wait, why is some of our most valuable real estate got these rundown movie theaters in it showing Kung Fu movies? We could sell these for office towers and get higher tax base. And so it all sort of died in the late 80s, but the stories to get there are wild. And we've got so much crazy art that I've never seen more. Chris is an amazing researcher, and we interviewed a ton of people, some of whom passed away while we were writing the book, who just were part of the scene, whose stories are kind of, this is the last place to find them. So yeah, it's These Fists Break Bricks. TheseFistsBreakBricks.com has all the information about the book, and you can order it online or in bookstores momentarily, I hope.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah. Thanks, man.